Hello Admirals and welcome back to my channel where I talk to you about Battlefleet Gothic, the space fleet game based in the Warhammer 40,000 universe. So I've come to the end of the starter fleet, the 1500 point starter fleets for all the different factions, the official factions I might add. But there was one more faction that kind of pops up that people often ask me about, and that's the Inquisition. And they don't specifically have a fleet list. However, they do have rules within Battlefleet Gothic. So in this video, I'm just going to kind of talk a little bit about the Inquisition, how to potentially use them in Battlefleet Gothic. And yeah, you do get the three main factions of the Inquisition that you could potentially use. So this is probably going to be a little bit shorter and not necessarily so much a fleet list, but some options around utilizing Inquisitors and the actual Inquisition within Battlefleet Gothic and its context there. So yeah, let's just have a quick chat about the Ordo Malleus, Ordo Hereticus, and Ordo Xenos. So as I said, the Inquisition hasn't got a fleet list on its own. So instead, though, there are various ways in the rules to add an Inquisitor or Inquisitorial ships into Imperial factions. So you can add Inquisitors into the Imperial Fleet list or the Space Marine Fleet list. And I'll add mech as well. And any of those fleets which are 750 points or more can be led by an Inquisitor Lord. So someone like Mr. Cortez here, for instance. They can be aboard an Inquisitorial cruiser, which has rules in the game. You can have black ships that have their own specific rules. I think they've got a weapons battery 10, and they've got some bombardment cannons, which are pretty cool. And there are specific Grey Knight cruisers as well. But they can be included in a fleet list. And if none of those ships are actually included in your fleet, then you need to put the Inquisitor on the most expensive ship. It's pretty kind of self-explanatory there. Now, while you can include things like an Inquisitorial black ship or even Grey Knight strike cruisers into a fleet list, where I think you get most flavour for Inquisition is the different types of Inquisitors you can put on. So there are rules for the three main Inquisitorial factions. You have Ordo Malleus, Ordo Xenos, and Ordo Hereticus. And they're the ones are the ones that kind of add flavour. So if you're really into kind of the narrative and you want to include a Inquisitor in your fleet, then they're the kind of the main ones that you have to play around with. Now, if you really want to add a little bit of spice and add those sort of Inquisitors and that sort of thing in, then and you have some spare points, 25 points worth, in fact, an Ordo Hereticus Inquisitor can lead one of your ships. And where I think they get really good bonuses on boarding actions and increase your leadership. All the Inquisitors kind of do that, but the Ordo Hereticus adds some really good boarding values. So if you are a boarding heavy fleet, like Space Marines for example, then adding one of them in really is really good. They also actually improve hit and run attacks as well. So really good for a Space Marine fleet, and maybe even like a little added bonus for Imperial fleets. And they can cause a few surprises. Maybe even throw them on maybe they're on a AdMech fleet, and suddenly an AdMech fleet can board. That would be a pretty major surprise, quite frankly, there. Now, if you really want to mess up folks in boarding, though, an Ordo Malleus Inquisitor, which also has boarding improvements, also has improvements in their hit and run attacks as well, but they're incredibly mean towards chaos. They have added bonus that any Marks of Khorne, Slaanesh, Tzeentch, or Nurgle, or any demon ships, their specific rules don't affect Ordo Malleus, essentially, and they don't actually affect the ship that they're at. So if you're a Slaanesh, Mark of Slaanesh on a Chaos ship, for example, its effect of minusing leadership within a certain distance won't affect the Malleus cruiser led by that Inquisitor. So Khorne don't get their double boarding values against you. So if you really want to, if your main opponent is Chaos and they're messing around with those Marks of Khorne and Marks of Slaanesh, or maybe even Nurgle trying to prevent you from boarding, suddenly with an Ordo Malleus Inquisitor on board, you can do that or prevent them from doing that. So for 25 points as well, can really add a good little mix into that. And so tactically, suddenly you have options that you didn't before. For example, boarding a Nurgle ship, you suddenly can do that with one of those Inquisitors aboard. Now, my personal favourite is Ordo Xenos, though. And the reason for that is you can randomly roll for upgrades on an upgrades table for Inquisitor vessels, or you can just pay to choose one. And I think paying 5 points to be able to choose an upgrade on your Inquisitorial ships is well worth the points, because you can put. I personally love the Grav Thruster, which you can, having a battleship able to do double its turn movement is a pretty powerful upgrade. Maybe on a battle barge, or maybe on a recommissioned Emperor class, or maybe even an Apocalypse. That would be quite amusing. But anything that adds extra speed or extra ability to hit your opponents with improved weapons batteries and things like that, I'm always a big fan of. They have the typical things like others, like the defense shielding. Additional shielding. They've got the defense turrets, which gives you a +1 to shields or +1 to turrets. They've also got the targeting matrix, like I've talked about in previous videos, where it ignores the shift over 30 and you're closing within 30. So suddenly maybe that retribution, something like that, with an Inquisitor or Xenos on it, suddenly can be hitting pretty damn hard. And, for an extra 5 points, that's pretty good in my view. They are the most expensive Inquisitor, though, so typically the Ordo Malleus and Ordo Hereticus are 25 points each, but the Ordo Xenos are 30 points. So you are paying a little bit more for that Inquisitor and that opportunity to roll or pay for those upgrades. Now, there's one more little bonus with the Ordo Xenos that I think people kind of either miss or ignore or something like that. But as long as you're facing a certain opponent, i.e. Eldar, rolled saves against holofields or shadowfields or similar, against boarding actions or hit and run attacks, succeed on a 3+ rather than 2+. So they don't get their 2+ save, they get a 3+ save. Now, that doesn't sound like a lot, but that could really do serious damage to an Eldar cruiser, or completely wipe out Eldar escorts with the critical hits and things like that. So with hit and run attacks, so they don't get those saves. They get worse saves. So if you're potentially going up against a lot of Eldar, maybe an Ordo Xenos on one of your ships that you have improved boarding with, and things like that. Improved leadership, suddenly can maybe catch that Eldar out. So a little tiny video on Inquisition and how to add Inquisitors into your fleet, admirals. You can add more Grey Knight strike cruisers, for example, like that, if you want to have a fleet of Grey Knight taking to the field as well. But there's a lot of sort of funky, janky rules to play with Inquisitors, and it's very narrative, it's very flavoursome. You can really add something into the game, and there's a lot of opportunities to play around with it. I think for the Ordo Xenos, there's some real fun sort of things you can play around with to improve your ships with those upgrades. If you only have just enough points, I think the Hereticus ones to add those additional improvements to your hit and run and your boarding actions as well as leadership is a great option if you've only got a small amount to play with. But if you really want to play against chaos loads and you really want to mess around with how they're operating, then as an Order Malleus is quite hilarious, to be perfectly honest. Yeah, so a lot of flavour, a lot of fun that can be had. Let me know if any of you admirals have used your Inquisitors in your games to see how they've gone. Any thoughts on tactics you would potentially use with Inquisitors in your Imperial fleets? And just remember, Imperials, AdMech, and Space Marines can all have them. So worth having a look at, worth giving a go, and I'll see you again in the next video, Admirals. Cheers.